Hello everyone, and thank you for the invitation. We are very happy to be there with you this morning in France. So my name is Hugues Benoit-Cattin, and I'm a professor at INSA Lyon University, and with my colleague Stéphane Grumbach, who is Director of Research at INRIA France. We are going to present you a feedback with an executive board meeting in 2050. Where we use the time machine, and we want to talk to you about how time machine can change our perspectives and way of thinking. So as an introduction, of course, you know that we are in what we call the VUCA and BANI world. And in this context, it's very difficult to envision the future, to align strategies. And for specifically universities, it's a kind of paradoxal challenge because universities, as you know, have the responsibility of educating the next generation of professionals. And unlike governments, they may feel less threatened and tend to continue business as usual because they have time. There are universities. And fortunately, some of these universities are really taking the problem on board. And we will be looking at the case of my university in Lyon that has been involved in some innovative approaches from some years now. And my university, with the help of Stéphane, has tested the future design approach with the time machine in a board meeting of the university. So in few words, in Lyon, so a French university has been created in 1957, at a time where there was a lack of engineers in France, and it has implemented an engineering education which is quite original, with a vision of engineers like a philosopher in action. And today we have 5,040 engineering students within 9 engineering departments. We have 600 PhD students working in 22 research laboratories with 700 faculty members and 600 administrative staff. And since 2018, we run some new strategic direction, and we start by testing what we call the prospective approach of the co-founder of the school, which is Gaston Berger, and who was a philosopher. And on this picture, you see a global overview of the prospective approach of this prospective approach. So in this scheme, what is very interesting is this block, the exploratory scenery of the futures, which is based on, of course, major trends, but also small signals and possible disruptions. And it is built studying the environment of the universities within these prospective systems. And we have studied 18 exploratory scenarios, and we deepen 5 of them, making working 500 staff and students and 80 external partners. And from this 5 scenarios, working with the diagnostic of the schools, we raise 9 key issues, and then we run to the strategic orientation. And so this strategy, which has been defined in 2020, is built around 5 transitions: environmental, social, digital, institutional, and financial. And it's quite an open strategy because it has to be adapted to this VUCA world we mentioned before. And we were just to emphasize that we ran something quite original for universities, that we have set 5 steering groups, including staff and students. And these steering groups have to evaluate the institution progress and have to propose some new actions and project, not progress, project, which is a mistake on the side. So one of the major projects currently underway concerns the ecological and social transition. And in 2020, this year, in fact, we set an assembly of 100 people staff, students, partners, drawn in part by Rotary and inspired by the French Climate Convention. And the mission of this assembly is to propose new strategic orientations to meet the growing social ecological challenges. It is built around 4 two-day sessions with conferences, collaborative workshops. And it's interesting to note that some workshops are connected to the future. One is on writing a letter to a person from the future. Another one is a kind of personal transportation into the future with some shared sensations when we return to present. And because, of course, we are speaking of the future, I'd like to hand over to Stéphane to explain more the time machine experiment we conduct with the INSA Lyon board. So Stéphane, if you please.
Thanks, Hugues. So about 6 months ago, after discussions we had with various people of the direction of INSA, including the director himself, we conducted a future design experiment. Can you go to the next slide? So essentially, we had 2 hours of the regular meeting that the board of INSA has. And these 2 hours were split into 3 different time slots. The first one was an introduction to the method. The second part was the transportation in 2050. So we are a bit less ambitious than Igor and Rick. We went 4 years. We're 4 years before, but and the last part was coming back to 2024 and debriefing on this experiment. So I first introduced the future design methodology, which was unknown to most people. And I guess some of the participants were quite skeptical, yet another time wasted on experiments. Then we had a presentation of the future. So the time of 2050, and this was prepared by a group of students who actually, so I explained them future design, and I explained them what we wanted to do, and they made a scenario for 2050, and they chose 2 aspects of the description of the world. One was that the environmental degradation, the assumptions that we have today, the most pessimistic assumptions had become reality. And the second one was that China had become a leading power comparable to the US, and so in the control of the world, but also intellectually. So that was their choice, and so we choose not to have an overall presentation of what 2050 could look like, but just give two aspects of 2050, ignoring all the rest. For instance, what the digital would look like, or many other questions. Then there was a presentation of the director of INSA, who recalled essentially what Hugues just presented about the strategy, the history of how this strategy was implemented and how it would be pursued in the future. Then we took the time machine. That was, we tried to somehow materialize it. And I think I would be eager to know more about what had been done. I asked Yoshi, who told me to find a solution and invent something new. But so we used the sound. That was the sound of teleportation in 2050. and then we were in 2050. What we knew of 2050 were the two aspects of the scenario that was presented. And then we went over the table and everybody was supposed to assess and have a critical look of how they were thinking in 2024, what they were doing in 2024 in the past. And what was interesting is that I think the first two persons made mistakes on today and yesterday. But then after that, everybody today was 2050. There was no ambiguity anymore, and 2024 was yesterday in the past. And that was very surprising for me that if there were mistakes initially, then there was no mistake at all anymore. Something had happened. And then after an hour of discussion, we went back to 2024 with the time machine, and we shared our impressions and emotions or ideas, and there was a critical analysis of the method. There are many things actually that were very surprising to me. There was something, in fact, there is something, I think, very magical. Maybe magical is not the right word, but maybe I also thought about the word religious. People participate to the exercise without discussing the exercise. So, for instance, we put the 2050 assumptions that we had, the two focus, and nobody discussed them. I mean, they are reasonable assumptions, but that was not the point. The point was to agree that we go to 2050. There is an artifact to go to 2050, and in fact, it doesn't matter what assumption we take for 2050, apart from the fact that we have to discuss if in 2024 we were making the right move towards 2050. But what is really interesting is that the new truth, which is the setting of 2050, is the important. I mean, what it is doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that we do this exercise. So there was a very surprising engagement of people. The second thing that I found very fascinating is the way it opens a freedom of thought. There is essentially no inhibition anymore to look at what you are doing with a very critical thinking. Something that would not be possible if we were staying in 2024, because if I was too critical, I would feel not very comfortable about it. So those two aspects were somehow magical for me. Now, essentially, I think probably we find these aspects in many other future design experiments. There was not only a critical stance of what we did in 2024 in the past, but there was also the idea that we should act differently. But not only that, but we should act. So somehow people were getting more courage thanks to this exercise. And that was also something that I found very magical. And of course, there are mechanisms, because you're not anymore under the constraints of the present that force you to act on many small questions that you have to solve. Okay, next one. So now the question is, what do we do this experiment with INSA? And so that's a question, for me, that's a question with INSA. But it's also a question in general about how we develop this type of methodology. And again, as I said before, I lack experience. I should have much more experience and discuss more with people who made these experiments. But there is a question with INSA, which is, as Hugues explained, involved into a long effort with many aspects, and also students who want to see changes in the way in the education they get. But what do we do? Do we repeat this experience like every year, every 6 months? We have a scenario for 2050 or maybe some other date, and we practice that as a regular thinking methodology. Do we involve specific types of people for making the scenario of 2050? Is there a training on making those scenarios? So there are many questions about the methodology for I mean, I'm learning. We are learning while doing that. I'm sure there is experience on that. Thank you.
Thank you.